Good morning and welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. I'm Robert Phoenix, broadcasting to you live, as I almost always do, from Austin, Texas. How is everybody? We are right here, right now, at the kind of the last phases of the Gemini full moon. It's in the waning phase now, but it's still on. So we get to look at things from two different perspectives, which is what Gemini brings to us. It's the great gift of Gemini to be able to bifurcate our attention and examine things from a mental perspective. And when we have the emotional body brought into it, we can safely engage our emotions from a mostly detached place. It's an interesting moon for sure. And it's on now, and it's opposing Saturn. And as the day goes on, there'll be more lunar Saturnian opposition. So we talked about this last night on the live stream on the 11th house over on YouTube. And that is the strain between the mother and the father, the masculine and the feminine, the patriarchy, Saturn, and the matriarchy, which is the La Lune, whatever that thing up there is. So that's what's on the plate astrologically today. And we're going to do our best to stay in that mode and stay in that groove and dissect things in ways that we normally do here for roughly about 35-40 minutes and get you on your way, get you on your day. So today we're going to look at, of course, the Michael Flynn fiasco. Talked about this a little bit on Friday's show. By the way, I want to thank Steve and Chris for being on the show on Friday. The audio was pretty good, huh? I mean, we've had some challenges with the audio in the past, but I think I solved that. I've nailed that down because that's what we do. We solve things on this show. So I talked a little bit about the Michael Flynn piece on Friday, and it was just all really, breaking pretty much right around the time I was doing the show. And one of the things that I didn't get a chance to talk about, because it happened after, kind of in concert with everything, is what Brian Ross did as part of the newsbreaker here. Now, what Ross essentially promulgated was fake news. And he was saying that because of what Flynn was going to confess, because he pled guilty. He pled guilty to lying to the FBI, which is the same thing that Martha Stewart did, by the way. It was the same thing. And it was not related to Russia at all. Okay, and what Brian Ross was attempting to do was he was attempting to make this connect with Russia and Russia throwing the election. I mean, it's just a completely absurd premise to begin with. I just want people to remember that Van Jones, when asked about Russia, he said it's just a big fat nothing burger. And of course he did it while Veritas was undercover. But he still said it. It's a big fat nothing burger. There's nothing there. Nothing there. The files weren't hacked. No, the email servers weren't hacked. They were leaked. Seth Rich has disappeared. whether he's dead or he's been reassigned somewhere else, through his Mossad connections. Just go back and watch that interview with Seth Rich's parents. It's one of the most bizarre interviews I've ever freaking seen. It's really strange. You've got all the Disney stuff in the background. You've got the brother who's smirking. You've got the father who's basically reading the lines to the mother. The whole thing was just completely weird. But the files weren't hacked. And let's just say for a moment they were hacked. Does that mean that the information therein is somehow false? Unless they loaded that information in there, knowing ahead of time it would be false, and then allowing them to be hacked so that we would have a hacking and we'd have false information. And oh my God, what a honey trap. I don't think it really worked that way. Although this is the state of American politics now, it's all a game of gotcha, and it's all a game of super espionage, and there are forces that are running games all the time. That's not to say that the Russians are squeaky clean and snowy white. They're not. Nobody in this world is. You can bet your ass that the Chinese are running their intelligence operations, the Russians are running their intelligence operations, the Mossad are running their intelligence operations, the British, MI5. Everybody's trying to get something. Everybody's trying to get something on everybody else. Because there's just such an utter level of distrust and cynicism and rampant agendas that are being concocted by these so-called countries, which are really just kind of corporate states and corporate zones. And what we're really seeing is corporation versus corporation, or gang versus gang. It's gang warfare is really what it is. So we have this guy, Brian Ross, who comes out on Friday and drops not a nothing burger, but a shit burger on this whole Michael Flynn Trump deal. And the stock market drops 300 points. That's a pretty significant drop, even though, again, the stock market is pretty much ruled and regulated now by algorithms. Still, nonetheless, it's a pretty significant drop. And then they find out that he's lying, that he fudged the report. He over-exaggerated. And he gets his wrist slapped, and he's going to be suspended for 4 months. But you see what happens in a situation like that is that the cat is out of the bag. Right? It's kind of like when you're at a trial and one of the attorneys says something. One of the attorneys is going down a line of questioning, which is completely outside the bounds of the jurisdiction and the rules of engagement in a trial, and they'll do it on purpose, and they know they're going to have the other attorney object. And if the judge says abstained or overruled, or so, what that essentially means is that it's either going to be part of the public record, being the court stenographer, or it won't, right? And if it's overruled, it gets to stay in the public record. And if it's abstained, then it's got to be taken out. But the effect of that is that the jurors hear it. Can the jurors unhear that moment? It's like, oh, okay, well, if a court reporter can't record this, then maybe we shouldn't. But it's already gone through their ears. There's already been, in their own minds, a summary judgment of what just took place and what was said. So it's a tactic and a strategy that's used in court, and most of the time they'll get a ruling of abstain, right? Abstain, and then they'll go back to more civil line of questioning, interrogation, et cetera, et cetera. But this is what happened with Brian Ross. It's the same deal. And what we found out was, of course, it was misleading. It was erroneous. But just to give you an example of how this works, okay? I don't do a lot of Twitter, but I follow it sometimes. And sometimes I get a bug up my ass. And lately it's been Robert Reich, who is a teacher at the University of California, Berkeley. And I think it was probably about 5 years ago, I was hanging out at a cafe in Berkeley with a friend. And he came in with some of his friends, and they were the most bitter, depressed, down-looking bunch you'd ever seen. Like who'd want to hang out with these people? There's probably about 4 of them. I think two men, 2 women. They're all kind of academic types. They sat around drinking tea, being super serious. Everything was, their talking was, it's like, who would want to hang out with that? I mean, come on. Why don't you go to a bar and have a shot or two and lighten up? Anyway, I just watched the guy. I was like, ugh. Talk about pretentious. Anyway, so I've been following him a little bit on Twitter, and this guy's he's in a full court press now. And he along with, and again, I'm not trying to put this into a liberal kind of straitjacket. I just watch what happens. Now he's taking this information and he's running with it on his Twitter account. And he's basically amping up this whole idea of organizing and voting people out and using this as the fuel. Of course he has to. It's part of his ideology. If he's not going to do that, then he may as well just drink some poison like this guy did in the NATO hearings, which we're going to talk about today. Rob Reiner, same thing. He's doing the same thing. He's taking this piece of reportage that was erroneous by Brian Ross, and he's creating a whole case around it. This is the plank that they're going to use towards impeachment for Trump. And there's nothing there. And we're going to actually get into what might be there. And God forbid if these people really want to kind of pull the cover back and see what's really going on with not just Michael Flynn, but Jared Kushner, who, of course, is the X factor in all of this. But this is what they do. So the world that we live in and the models that are used to create signal and motivate people are based on falsity, erroneous information, misinformation, disinformation, the illusion of reportage. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So let's get into Brian Ross's past. Let's talk about him. This is from RT. Who's behind ABC's fake news about Flynn? Brian Ross's journalistic blunders. Brian Ross, I looked him up on Wikipedia. This guy has more awards, more journalism awards than the list just goes on. I think he's probably got about 30 different awards. One of his big stories that he broke was Mark Foley, who's from, I believe, Washington, if I'm not mistaken. He was a senator, and he was, sleeping around. I think it was with guys. And there was like the Washington Page scandal. He won a lot of awards for that. But let's go a little bit deeper with Brian Ross. Journalist Brian Ross's inaccurate report of Mike Flynn's guilty plea on Friday caused stocks to plummet and forced ABC to issue a correction. But this isn't the first time he's been caught making fake news. Citing anonymous officials, Ross claimed Flynn agreed to testify that candidate Trump told him to contact the Russians during the election on ABC's special report. However, the source told Ross that the order came when Trump had already won the election and was president-elect. ABC News has now announced it has suspended Brian Ross for 4 weeks without pay following the faulty reporting. That's a slap on the, not even the wrist, it's a slap on the pinky. This guy should be done. Correction. During a live special report, ABC News reported that a confidant of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn said Flynn was prepared to testify that then-candidate Donald Trump instructed him to contact Russian officials during the campaign. That source later clarified that during the campaign, Trump assigned Flynn and a small circle of other senior advisors to find ways to repair relations with Russia and other hotspots. It was shortly after the election that President-elect Trump directed Flynn to contact Russian officials on topics that include working jointly against ISIS. So that's their correction. Now, let me get this straight here, okay? He's the President of the United States. Whether you like the guy or not, he's the President of the United States. Don't you think it's his job to direct somebody that works with him after he's been elected? Like, it's official, right? You're elected, dude. You're the guy. You're the guy. In as much as we had to go through all that bullshit with the Electoral College and all that bullshit with Jill Stein, all that stuff, it's still at the end of the day, he was elected. Correct? Yes, that is the case. So he can tell Mike Flynn, who he had was going to be on his team, go contact these people. At what point is there a special time that it can take place? Here we go. Here we go. Correction of ABC News special report. Flynn prepared to testify. This is a tweet from ABC News. Flynn prepared to testify that President-elect Donald Trump directed him to make contact with Russians during the transition, initially as a way to work together to fight ISIS. Ross, an award-winning investigative reporter, he's got a lot of awards. Look at his Wikipedia page. Working for ABC for more than 2 decades and made something of a career of explosive reports that later transpired to be inaccurate or fake news. Ari Fleischer, his tweet. You just knew this report was wrong as soon as ABC and Brian Ross reported it. Chris Vanderveen. A lot at stake for ABC and Brian Ross on the new report. If right, big deal. If wrong or misinterpreted, then it will provide plenty of ammo for fake news movement, of course. Here's a little hit parade for Brian Ross. In 2001, Ross reported that anthrax attacks in the U.S. were likely the work of Iraq. Citing 4 anonymous sources, Ross claimed the anthrax contained bentonite, which is known to have been used by only one country in producing biochemical weapons, Iraq. Bentonite. I drink bentonite. At the time, Ross was in good company with Senator John McCain, also suggesting the anthrax was the work of Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. The White House, on the other hand, said no tests ever found or even suggested the presence of bentonite. The FBI later concluded that the attacks were carried out by U.S. Army biodefense expert Brucer Ivins, and not Hussein, who at that stage was long dead following the 2003 Iraq invasion. And yet, in 2001, that's fuel, right? That's fodder to go in there and take over Iraq, which is essentially what we did. U.S., this is from RT, U.S. said it had full proof of WMDs. 1 million people died. UN slams Syria, strikeful video. The Aurora shooter. Following the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting in 2012, Good Morning America, Russell Good Morning America, he discovered that shooter Jim Holmes may be a member of the Colorado Tea Party. His investigation amounted to finding someone with the same name on the Tea Party Patriots website. ABC later issued a correction. The Fort Hood shooter. In 2009, Ross claimed he had uncovered how Fort Hood shooter Nidal Malik Hassan had attempted to reach out to people associated with Al-Qaeda. His report sparked theories that the Fort Hood shooting, which left 13 dead, was part of a larger terrorist plot. Ross's scoop was based on Hassan emails to one individual, Anwar al-Awlaki, a cleric living in Yemen who used to be the imam of Hassan's mosque in Virginia. The FBI was already aware of these emails, which consisted of conversation about academic research, and it found they didn't warrant investigation. When pressed on his claims, Ross admitted that the people he was referring to was just all lucky. Hassan later told the court that he was attempting to defend the leaders of the Taliban. So he has a fairly consistent record of padding the truth. Here's another one. In 2010, Ross reported that Toyota cars had unintended acceleration. Ross demonstrated this in an on-air report showing him driving one of the cars going out of control. The footage showed the car's tachometer going from 1,000 RPM to 6,000 RPM in 1 second. But the dashboard lights also revealed the car was parked with the doors open at the time. This was then spliced into scenes of Ross driving the car. This was reported by Gawker. So this guy's a serial liar. Total serial liar. And the comments here are actually pretty good comments. Actually, it should be something to be prosecuted for, like shouting fire in a crowded theater. The stock market plunged, people lost money and were harmed. Why should he get off scot-free? I hope investors lost a ton of money and they sue ABC into bankruptcy. Easiest analysis ever. Brian Ross is an MSM serial fabricator. It's MSM. What an insight into a crazed mind of a frustrated liberal who drives everyone's attention, craves everyone's attention. In the Soros era, MSM and NGOs can do and say all they want. The truth doesn't matter. They call it the post-truth era. This is true. This is absolutely true. And yet here we are at the final degrees of Saturn in Sagittarius, Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, where there are repercussions. And what are we doing? We're going backwards now. We're going back into Brian Ross's career. That's a retrograde moment because his credibility is shaky at best. Now, there are things that he broke. There are things that he was involved with that seem to have been corroborated, like the Mark Foley stuff. But these are huge, because look at the thing with the Aurora shooter, James Holmes. What happens there? All of a sudden, we have this idea that the shooter is a guy who is a crazed ideologue who wants nothing more than to have good old white America back. And that's not even the case at all. And yet that's what gets out. This is exactly the same process where an attorney in a court of law goes down a line of questioning that he or she knows is not permissible and will probably raise an objection from the other attorney. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't go on the public record, but it crosses the ears and the brain waves of the 12 people in that room who matter the most. So this is are we surprised? We're not surprised at all. This is how the game works. Now, Trump is furious. And he's going after this whole Flynn thing. Like, what Trump is doing now is he's comparing Flynn to Hillary Clinton. And this is just going to completely flip wigs. He just threw another grenade into the ring. He doesn't care. This is the one thing that if this is not the clone, if this is the real Trump, or it's not a computerized program that's firing off these tweets, he doesn't care. He doesn't care what people think. This guy, he's got to have the thickest skin in the world. If that is really the same Trump that's in there in the White House. And it'll be interesting to watch how all these people run around and try to get all hyperventilating and have paroxysms of petty frustration and rage against Trump. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Because also he's putting the pressure on the Department of Justice and the FBI. Because there seems to be two standards at work here. And clearly there is. What I wanted to do is get into the Jared Kushner stuff a little bit. I've got to reload a lot of these pages because for some reason my computer decides that it wants to take me off pages. and they wind up being, just go away here. So I've got a bunch of tabs that are all set up, and I want to just get into some of this. The Kushner stuff is kind of important because it's connected to Michael Flynn. Here we go. So Russia Insider, another stalwart web portal for fair and unbiased content. We don't know, but I'm going to read this anyway. It says here, FBI has Flynn lying about ties to Israel, not Russia. So I'm going to read you two things here which will get you to think about this a little bit differently. Several major U.S. media outlets were initially silent about the Israeli connection, making it seem as if Flynn's guilty plea was vindication of Russiagate instead. So then, after several months of investigation into Trump team's alleged Russia ties, Mueller has Manafort on ties to Kiev and Flynn on ties to Tel Aviv. Where is Russia in all of this? I'll read this to you. This came out Saturday. Former U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn entered a guilty plea Friday to lying about efforts by the incoming Trump administration to help Israel avoid censure at the UN Security Council over its illegal settlements on occupied Palestine. Whoa, a little bit of a different angle here, isn't it? Yet several major U.S. media outlets were initially silent about the Israeli connection. Flynn appeared in federal court in Washington to admit that he lied about conversations he had with Russian ambassador last December, in the weeks before Donald Trump took oath of office. The single count charges that Flynn lied to federal investigators about two conversations. In the first, on 22 December, of course that's the solstice, Flynn asked the Russian envoy to delay or defeat the UN Security Council vote condemning Israel's settlements. In the second conversation a week later, Flynn had asked the Russian government to refrain from retaliating harshly to sanctions imposed by the Obama administration, an act that ironically would benefit the United States. According to the charge sheet, Flynn made false statements to the FBI about these conversations during questioning on 24 January 2017, days after Trump took office and Flynn was already the National Security Advisor. Flynn's guilty plea is a result of the ongoing investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, the former FBI director appointed by the Department of Justice in May to lead a broad investigation sparked by allegations of ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. Flynn's plea is widely taken as an indication he's cooperating with Mueller and that he may provide evidence against other targets of the investigation. Collusion with Israel. The Trump transitions team's effort to halt the UN resolution was unsuccessful. It passed with no opposition on 23 December after the Obama administration declined to cast a veto. So this was, Trump gets sworn in on January 30th, correct? So this is 7 days before that, and Obama is still there, so they don't veto this thing. Flynn's plea adds to the mounting evidence of Trump's collusion with Israel to shield it from accountability for its violations of international law. Last month, the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump's son-in-law and Middle East peace envoy, Jared Kushner, was being probed by Mueller over contacts with Israeli officials aimed at thwarting the UN vote. In October, Trump campaign policy advisor George Papadopoulos also pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI in the course of the Mueller investigation. While Papadopoulos is a far more junior figure than Flynn, he had championed Israeli settlers during an April 2016 visit to Israel. Papadopoulos' remarks impressed one Israeli right-wing observer that Trump has somewhat of a prism on world affairs and that there are some reasonably informed people trying to advise him. Yet despite the clear signs that Trump's consistent concerns seem to be advancing Israeli rather than Russian interests, the focus in U.S. mainstream media has barely paid attention to the collusion with Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Reports on the websites of NPR, CNN, and CBS about Flynn's plea seen by the Electronic Intifada on Friday morning initially made no mention of Israel at all. CBS and CNN later added information about Flynn's role in trying to thwart the UN resolution vote. This is from Haaretz.com, Haaretz being a famous newspaper in Israel. According to Justice Department Flynn contacted the Russian ambassador back in December 2016 ahead of the UN vote on the settlements to inquire if Russia would agree to veto it. The vote took place before Trump took office while the Obama administration was still in power. Israeli officials asked Trump's transition team for assistance in blocking the vote. After it became clear that Obama would not veto it, eventually, despite Flynn's request, Russia voted in favor of the resolution. But his conversations with the Russians about the matter have gotten Flynn in legal trouble. This is from Haaretz.com, okay? Flynn also falsely told FBI officials that in December 2016, he did not ask Russia's ambassador to refrain from escalating the situation after Washington imposed sanctions on Moscow. Let's keep going here if I can get my computer to play nice. Let's see what we have here. This is Sam Husseini. His tweet says, funny how the Israeli press is highlighting Flynn apparently lying to help Israel more than the U.S. press. Okay. NBC and the New York Times mentioned Israel in their reports, respectively, in the 10th and 8th paragraphs. To its credit, NBC noted that Flynn, while not yet in office, was trying to get the Russians to do what Israel wanted and thus undercut U.S. policy at that time, which was Obama's policy, because Obama, of course, was so friendly and nice to Bibi Netanyahu. Citing sources briefly on the inquiry, the New York Times reported that Mueller's investigators have learned through witnesses and documents that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel asked the Trump transition team to lobby other countries to help Israel. Investigators have learned that Mr. Flynn and Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, took the lead in those efforts. The newspaper states, adding that Mueller's team has emails that show Mr. Flynn saying he would work to kill the vote. This is the story. It is not collusion with Russia. This is the story. And the mainstream media is doing everything in their power to circle the wagons and make this about Russia. We're getting closer to the truth here now. On Twitter, CNN's Jim Sciutto, citing an FBI statement, pointed out that Flynn contacted the Russians after being asked by a senior Trump transition official to find out how foreign governments stood in the coming UN Security Council resolution about Israel. And there's his tweet. This is what he says, important. Flynn says he was told to contact Russians. According to the FBI statement, Flynn communicated with Kislyak after being asked by a senior Trump transition official, that's going to be Jared Kushner, to find out how foreign governments stood in the coming UN Security Council about Israel. That indicates that Flynn might well have been in touch with other Security Council members, not just Russia. Yet, despite this, the overwhelming focus remains on alleged collusion with Russia. The obvious Israeli connection has not garnered the same obsessive attention from liberal politicians and pundits who have jumped on every Russiagate allegation of collusion, no matter how dubious or fictional. This is from the Electronic Intifada, and Russia Insider reprinted it. I want to read you another piece here. This is from Newsweek, of course, a mainstream publication here in the United States. And this is from 12/3, which is yesterday. And it says Jared Kushner failed to disclose he led. Hold on, so here we go. He led a foundation funding illegal Israeli settlements before the UN vote. Okay, so the Kushner family has stake in Israeli settlements. They're in the real estate business, and they have a stake in basically bulldozing Palestinian olive orchards and homes, leveling them, and then building new settlements. So this is from Newsweek. Jared Kushner failed to disclose his role as a co-director of the Charles and Sarah Kushner Foundation from 2006 to 2015, a time when the group funded an Israeli settlement considered to be illegal under international law. on financial records he filed with the Office of Government Ethics earlier this year. So he did not disclose that. The latest development follows reports on Friday indicating that the White House senior advisor attempted to sway a United Nations Security Council vote against the anti-settlement resolution passed just before Donald Trump took office, which condemned the structure of West Bank settlements. The failure to disclose his role in the foundation at a time when he's being tasked with serving the president's Middle East peace envoy follows a pattern of egregious omissions that would bar any other official from continuing to serve in the West Wing, experts and officials told Newsweek. The first son-in-law repeatedly amended his financial records since his initial filing in March, along with 3 separate revisions to a security clearance application. Despite correcting his financial history on multiple occasions, he has yet to include his role as co-director in the Family Foundation. The omission was first discovered by a team of researchers at American Bridge, a progressive research and communications organization, and shared exclusively with Newsweek on Friday afternoon. The researchers suggested Kushner's failure may have been more than an inadvertent mistake, but instead an attempt to avoid potential conflicts with his job negotiating Middle East peace, which is really just negotiating what Benjamin Netanyahu wants. Okay? Let's be clear about that. And to think that this guy, this dweeb, have you ever listened to him talk? Have you ever caught his vibe? This dweeb is in charge of negotiating one of the most tempestuous, bloody, angst-ridden, strife-filled, geopolitical hotspots on the entire planet and maybe the history of the world. You've got this dweeb from New Jersey out there trying to negotiate this thing and doing side deals with the Saudi Arabians. I mean, the whole thing is just bizarre. It's totally bizarre. And now the Trump administration is lurching towards making the embassy in Jerusalem versus Tel Aviv. And after that, well, now we're into the final moments of prophecy, according to those who know far better than I do in the Christian world. And the last bit will be converting the new temple, building the new temple on the Dome of the Rock. That'll be it. And after that, Israel probably gets wiped off the face of the earth, based on some other dark prophecies. Well, that's kind of where we are right now. Let me read a little bit more about this. The researchers suggested Kushner's failure may have been more than an inadvertent mistake, but instead an attempt to avoid potential conflicts with his job negotiating Middle East peace. Newsweek later independently confirmed Kushner's omission on his multiple financial disclosures. Every successive failure to disclose his financial holdings makes it harder and harder to believe Jared Kushner isn't trying to intentionally deceive the American people. Pat Dennis, the group's research director, told Newsweek, at the very least, his security clearance needs to be revoked immediately. He has no business accessing sensitive national security information. I totally agree with that. He's a fucking spy. I'm telling you, he's a spy. Total spy. And how Trump could let his daughter marry this guy. I mean, look. This has been one of the most surreal presidential elections and candidates. I don't think Trump was supposed to win, and he did. The Democrats probably saw him as incredibly fallible, and Hillary would mop him up. And it wasn't the case. But his worst decision, his worst presidential, his worst business decision of all time was having Ivanka marry into that Kushner real estate dynasty. The father was a criminal. The father spent 2 years in jail. There's a TV show on Amazon. It's called Red Oaks. And there's a character in there played by Paul Reiser, who I believe is modeled on Charles Kushner. All right, here we go. The foundation donated, this is an important part, the foundation donated at least $38,000 between 2011 and 2013 to a fundraising group building a Jewish seminary in a West Bank settlement known as Beit El. During that period, Kushner's foundation also donated an additional $20,000 to Jewish and educational institutes and settlements throughout the region. The Associated Press reported, had Kushner included the role in his financial records, his involvement in such donations, in the following conflicts of interest that could possibly arise in the government position, he may have been considered by the Office of Government Ethics. Despite the U.S.'s long-standing policy to diplomatically reject the construction of Israeli settlements, Kushner seemed to wave in a new diplomatic era among members of the Trump's transition team working on foreign issues, according to sources who spoke with the Washington Post, NBC, BuzzFeed, and Bloomberg. Each of these reports pointed at Kushner as being the very senior member of the transition team mentioned in charging documents Special Counsel Robert Mueller filed on Friday. So this is from ABC News. Jared Kushner is the very senior Trump transition official who told Flynn to contact Russia. Flynn is also prepared to testify he was directed to contact Russia by Trump initially as a way to work together to fight ISIS in Syria. Okay, so that could be kind of a prophylactic. Kushner demanded future National Security Advisor Michael Flynn get on the phone to every member of the Security Council, tell them to delay the vote. We just saw this from that piece on electronic infidata, which was reposted by Russia Insider. Kushner stated that he was a member of the board of directors of the Kushner Family Foundation from 2010 to 2017. Though publicly available financial records for the foundation do not include his name on the board, instead Kushner's role as a director for one of the family foundations can be found in the Charles and Sarah Kushner Foundation's financial records from 2015, the last year of which such documents are currently available to the public. Whether Kushner's latest discovered omission was intentional or not remained a mystery on Friday afternoon as news was exploding surrounding his involvement in the UN Security Council vote, which ultimately approved the resolution condemning the West Bank settlements. Representatives for the Office of Government Ethics, Jared Kushner, and Charles and Sarah Kushner Foundation did not immediately respond to requests for comment. He's revised his form several times already, Dennis said. There's no reason his lawyers couldn't have done what our researcher did. It wasn't rocket science. So here we go. This is really the Gordian knot. It is not Russia. This is not Russia was being used at that point in time, maybe with a dual purpose, because of course Trump is the Uber Gemini. Let's find out if we can defeat ISIS and ISIL. And oh, by the way, can you get some intel on how they're going to vote? And it came from Jared Kushner. This is where this needs to go. This is where these dweebs like Robert Reich and Rob Reiner, why are these people named Robert? It's an affront to the name of Robert. I'll tell you that right now. This is where they need to go. They need to drill down into this. Will they? Oh, it's highly unlikely because it doesn't fit their agenda. It does not fit their agenda. And this is what happens. Truth has become contextualized, and we're all guilty of it to some degree or another. Even in our own personal lives, we have to have a meticulous relationship with truth. And we all fail at some point because we're human. He raises his hand. Yeah, we fail. We're human. But this is where we are right now. It's this level of transparency, which is, again, related to this all-seeing eye, which I've been talking about. And this is the synthetic version of the omniscient, omnipresent God that watches you everywhere you go in a panoptical version of society. And that you will be judged on your past, on your present, and even potentially on your future based on what you've theoretically done. And this is not a system where there is any redemption or grace built into it. Because you are condemned from any number of nodal points along your journey, whether it's your genetic predisposition, whether it's what's gone on in your family history, not just what's inside of you. For instance, let's go back to Stephen Paddock. Okay, what was one of the things that sealed Stephen Paddock's deal? It was his father, who had been wanted by the FBI. Well, Stephen Paddock could have been somebody completely different, right? I mean, we think we know who Stephen Paddock was. A gun runner, maybe a drug runner, a guy who was a pilot, a checkered past with a ton of money, and probably one of the ways he laundered that money was gambling. But let's say he wasn't. Let's say he was just a guy and he was just caught up in a sting, in a bad moment. Well, clearly, he's got a father who was wanted by the FBI. So that's a form of condemnation and guilt. It's guilt by association. You see what I'm talking about? If you've got somebody in your family history who is notorious, well, then you in turn must be notorious as well. So there's all these numbers of markers now which can determine kind of who we are, what we're capable of, what we're not capable of, and what we're... And there's absolutely no built-in... The only thing that gets you into redemption or grace is groveling. And even that now is kind of no longer an option. You used to be able to grovel and go into rehab. You can't even do that now. You're like Matt Lauer. He's unplugged from social media. I mean, that guy, Matt Lauer, his wife has left him. And apparently she left him years ago and they had a kind of an open relationship. But she's got to make it look good. Oh, I can't stand this. Oh. She'll divorce him. He'll have to pay out huge. I hope Matt Lauer's got some savings. Charlie Rose, will we ever see him again? No. Likely not. But what happens now is that people can take any of this information and then create a narrative that suits whatever, it's just mind-blowing. We're running about 30 different concurrent channels of truth at any given time. It's amazing. I was watching InfoWars last night, and it was a report by Owen Schroyer. I actually really like Owen Schroyer, by the way. I think he's really bright. I think he's fearless. I like that kid a lot. And he was down here at Texas State University, and they had written an op-ed about the disease of whiteness, and the author basically said that all white people needed to be eradicated and wiped off the face of the earth. And so he went down there and he confronted the students of Texas State and San Marcos. It's a state college. It's not some bastion of, Ivy League accreditation, even though that doesn't mean a lot these days. And there's a girl there, young woman, and she was confronting him. And she was going on and on and on about how that institution doesn't care about her. And I'm like, really? Why? She's getting an education. Do they have to tailor everything in that school in order to care about her? Is that what they're going to have to do? I mean, at what level or standard does it meet her precious level of sensitivity? And Schroyer asked her, well, why do you stay here? It was like, if they don't care about you, why do you stay here? I mean, this boggles my mind. Well, I can be here and get an education and still be here and complain about them not caring about me. How does that work? Wouldn't you rather be happy? But lamentation and anger seems to be the new form of happiness. It's another level of inversion. I mean, she's an African-American woman, right? This young African-American woman. If she doesn't like it there, why doesn't she go to a place like Grambling, or Florida A&M, or any number of colleges that are going to be more supportive to her experience? Why doesn't she just do that? Instead, she'd rather stay in a situation where she thinks she's being persecuted and therefore becomes kind of a martyr in some ways, right? Look at me, I'm getting my education in the midst of this incredible oppression. I'm a hero. I soldiered on against insurmountable odds. Nobody cares. If you're really that unhappy, go change it. Go to Morehouse. Go to Morehouse College. Go hang out there. Get your degree. No, people want to lament. Fascinating. Fascinating, because the victim status is such a prized position inside of our society. Oh, you just see your first job interview. Oh, we're so proud of you. You overcame such intense levels of oppression. How could you have gotten up every day and gone to that dastardly institution which demeaned you at every turn? You're just the type of person we're looking for. Oh yeah, hire that person. Wait till she gets in your corporation. And all of a sudden, the same standards that were applied to her college are now being applied to your corporation. Good luck on that. There's a civil suit waiting for you in your future. Man. Interesting, fascinating, just a fascinating watch. Well, I'll tell you one guy who was not happy and showed his displeasure and unhappiness in probably the most authentic way I've ever seen. Let me get this up here for you. Well, NATO and the UN love to persecute old war criminals. That's one of their little side gigs. That's a fetish. Let's bring out some old geezer and create a tribunal so that we can all feel good about ourselves. And just how morally pure and decent we are. I like to do this every now and then. Well, they brought out this guy who was a Bosnian Croat commander. There's a big war, in Bosnia and Croatia. People were not getting along. They did not want to get along. They wanted basically to live apart. But what happened is the UN got involved, NATO got involved, and there was a genocidal purge, let's put it that way, that took place. Let me read you this story. Slobodan Praljak, he's 72 years old. He was a former wartime leader. Here we go. This is. I'll start from the beginning. A Bosnian Croat wartime commander died on Wednesday, shortly after he drank poison. Seconds after UN appeals judges upheld his 20-year sentence for war crimes against Bosnian Muslims. So what happened during that time, we had the Muslims on the Bosnian side, and then you had Christians or non-Christians because of the communist era, but primarily whites. Okay, so you had Muslims and you had ex-Christians, closet Christians, former Christians, mostly white. And there was a war going on, and the UN and NATO forces were supporting the Bosnian side. Just keep that in mind, okay? So they were supporting the Muslim side. And again, I'm not a Muslim, anti-Muslim freak. I'm reporting the details here as they were. So Slobodan Praljak, 72, a former wartime leader, tilted his head back and took a swig from a flask or a glass as the judge read out the verdict. The man's defense lawyer then told the court that the accused had taken poison. The presiding judge stopped the proceedings and ordered a doctor to be called. Oh, isn't that just civilized of him? I just drank poison, he said. I'm not a war criminal. I oppose this conviction. He actually looks like my deceased Uncle Gary. Praljak sat back down and slumped in his chair. A lawyer who was in the courtroom at the time said the presiding judge suspended the hearing and called for a doctor. An ambulance was at the building and paramedics went to the courtroom. Praljak was convicted of involvement in a campaign to drive Muslims out of Bosnia and create an ethnically pure Croat state during the Bosnia War in the 1990s, sparked by the breakup of Yugoslavia. The conflict mainly saw Bosnian Muslims fighting Bosnian Serbs. There are also deadly clashes involving Bosnian Muslims and the Croats after an alliance fell apart. A total of 100,000 people died and 2.2 million were displaced in the 3-year war. Quoted by Reuters, Croatian General Marinko Kresic told Croatian state TV he has spoken to the wife of another defendant, General Miroslav Praljak, who is in The Hague. She confirmed that he drank poison and he's in very grave health condition, he said. Praljak died shortly thereafter. A UN judge who later called the site a crime scene said the Dutch police, so this was taking place at The Hague, were investigating the incident. As Reuters adds, the court said it would resume reading the verdict, which is also handling cases against 5 other defendants, including Milivoj Petkovic. Prior to drinking the substance, Praljak had heard that his 20-year sentence for alleged war crimes in the Bosnian city of Mostar was being upheld. Praljak, who is one of 6 former Bosnian Croats, having their appeal heard at UN tribunal, is reported to have told the judge that he's not a war criminal. The dramatic events came in the final minutes of the court's last verdict before closing down. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, established that the United Nations in 1993 shut its doors next month when its mandate expires. The court's lead suspect, former Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic, died of a heart attack in March 2006, months before ruling in his genocide case. 2 defendants awaiting trial committed suicide by hanging themselves in their UN cells, according to the court documents. Slavko Dogmanovic died in 1998, and Milan Babi was found dead in his locked cell in 2006. Last week, the same tribunal handed former Bosnian Serb General Ratko Mladic a life sentence for his role in genocide in the Balkan Wars. In the 1990s, Mladic was found guilty on 10 counts, 10 out of 11 charges, including the massacre of Bosnian Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica in 1995. He pleaded not guilty on all counts. Questions have been raised over fairness in the international prosecution of crimes committed during the Balkan Wars. Of the 161 individuals indicted by the ICTY, the body created specifically to prosecute wartime crimes, 94 ethnic Serbs compared to 29 Croats, 9 Albanians, and 9 Bosniaks. 2 years ago, Russia used its UN veto right to block a resolution on the 20th anniversary of the Srebrenica tragedy, saying that the draft document depicted the Serbian people as the sole guilty party in a complex armed conflict in Yugoslavia. Of course it was complex. Incredibly complex. But see, this guy decided that he didn't want to stay at that university. He said, fuck it. I'm taking this poison. I'm out of here. You do not get to rule my life any longer. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that type of standing in the face of these people who are passing judgment on an area that's war-torn, many of whom probably were never even in a war and don't know what that's like. Now, what this guy Praljak did is he blew up a bridge. And it was a bridge that basically separated the Muslims from the Croats. It was actually probably a good thing, right? Because if that bridge is there, there are probably a lot more lives that are going to be lost. He blew up a bridge. And of course, the bridge is a fetish for the globalists. They love the bridges. Oh, we love the bridges. Bridging cultures, bridging people, bridging countries. He blew the damn bridge up. I'm telling you, just, sometimes people don't want to be around other people. That's just the way it is. And there's no harm to that. There's no harm at all. None whatsoever. People should be allowed to live who they want to live around. Aren't we supposed to be free, theoretically? I mean, here, theoretically. But no. By the way, why isn't George Bush and Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld, why aren't they in front of a war crime tribunal? How come they're not being grilled for what they did in Iraq and everything else that's ensued ever since then? We could probably bring about 100 Americans. How come Tony Blair's not up there? These are the questions that really need to be asked. Instead of this dog and pony show where they get to go after their annual victim so that they can feel so much better about their own spiritual and moral purity, which is probably in the fucking gutter. But if they can pin the tail on the donkey and have somebody else suffer for it, it's their sacrifice at the altar of their own impure morality. That's all it is. And no matter how many people are sacrificed, it's not going to clear the stain on these people's lives, whatever that stain may be. All right. Just thought I'd leave you on an up note. You know, I try to do that every day. I mean, when I'm here, I do try to leave us on an up note. And the up note, again, is like sometimes, because we're right now, that the sun, Saturn's moving closer and closer to the sun. And it will be exact and conjunct on the solstice in Capricorn. And the message here is, this is not a time where we're going to be able to blow sunshine up each other's butts. I mean, we're going to go into an intense phase. And it's going to take every bit and sinew of our moral fiber and having to go through things on a personal level and on a collective level that are probably going to test us. It's just the way it is. This is I think we're really in a final phase here, folks. In terms of, of course we're going through the deconstruction of the country. That's happening. Would have happened under Hillary. And it might have been worse under Hillary. But that deconstruction phase, we were not going to be able to get out of it. And if people, maybe if we were shown the alternate movie, and now we're seeing what it is now, and the alternate movie could have been so incredibly worse, people would be on their hands and knees thanking God that Donald Trump might have been elected. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. So we're in a deconstruction phase, and we're also, I think, in a phase of this kind of era of the final judgment, in my estimation. Because what's going to happen is that there's going to be some form of judgment, whether it's going to be divine dispensation and holy judgment or sacred judgment, or it's going to be the judgment of the world. It's going to go down one way or the other. So this is our time. This is our time to check in and really see what we're made of in a lot of ways. But you're not alone. You're never alone. And no matter how much these godless heathens want to drive the divine spirit of life out of everything, it's still here. It may be fading. But it's still here. All right. With that, I'm going to sign off. Boy, we went for a whole hour today. Let me get back to some business at hand. You can go to my website, robertphoenix.com. I've got the live stream. I'll have the live stream up from last night from YouTube. You'll be able to check that out. And I've got the holiday specials on my chart, on my site for readings. If you want to get multiple readings for people, I've got a great deal. 3 readings, 3 half-hour readings, $40 a piece. That's $120 for 3 gifts that I guarantee you your peeps will love. And a lot of times when I do half an hour reading, it's not half an hour on the dot. Like, I'll go over, right? Because it's just who I am. So people get a pretty comprehensive reading for about $40. It's not a bad thing. And then this Saturday, I'm doing the webinar over at Astro Lotta. And that's going to be on Saturn in Capricorn, which everybody loves. Everybody loves Saturn in Capricorn. And that's it for, I think, the immediate news at hand. Regina Meredith has a new website up, and of course my latest interview with her is over there. And I've got a piece coming out in New Dawn magazine, which is based out of Australia, and that's going to happen real soon. All right, that's it. So you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible.